Hello everyone, welcome to General Psychology, Psychology 101, and today we're going to be talking about drugs and consciousness. So drugs are interesting in that generally drugs are taken, they're chemicals that are taken in order to change perceptions or moods in one shape or form. So for example, we might take a drug to put us in a better mood or reduce depression that we might be experiencing. So some people, these can be used for good, but sometimes they fall into a nasty trap where some people end up developing substance-related disorders that abuse psychoactive drugs. So a person might end up taking drugs too many times and develop what's known as a tolerance. That's when our brain chemistries adapt in a way where they offset the effect of a drug. So the drug doesn't become as potent as it once was, and we as humans require more of the drug in order to get the same effect that we used to. In this case, we can also see what's known as addiction. That's when a person craves and uses the substance despite the adverse consequences that they might experience at a later date. When people do become addicted, they become dependent on the drug. Sometimes this can be a physical dependence where, they experience physical pain, intense cravings due to not having the drug. This can also have psychological impacts. People might become psychologically dependent. Maybe when people end up being in really bad moods, have extreme bouts of negative emotion, and they just have to have the drug. But when people do become addicted and they develop this tolerance, sometimes they'll try to stop taking the drug. And that's when withdrawal will occur. That's when people experience these physical or psychological pain or intense cravings due to the absence of the drug in the system. And we often see withdrawal symptoms occur when people kind of go cold turkey, or they occurs when they abruptly stop using the drug in question. So what are the different types of drugs that we can be addicted to, or we can develop tolerance or dependence on? One subsection of drugs are depressants, and these calm our neural activity and slow down our bodily functions. So probably the most common depressant is alcohol. It again kind of calms neural activity, slows down our bodily functions. Generally people, when people think of alcohol, they might think of the buzz that they initially get. So people might think that it increases activity, but it actually decreases the areas of the brain that inhibit our behaviors that we wouldn't otherwise perform. So this can increase harmful behaviors, such as, for example, we see an increase in sexual abuse for people who are under the influence of alcohol, but it sometimes can increase positive behaviors, such as tipping more to a waiter or waitress than you otherwise would. Again, this is a depressant, so we're slowing down our neural processing. Alcohol can disrupt memory formation. Dependence on alcohol can actually lead to our brains shrinking, so changing our biology. We generally have reduces in self-awareness and self-control when drinking alcohol. And drinking alcohol can have strong expectancy effects. So whether or not we're actually getting drunk, we can react as if we are getting drunk, because we know that when we drink beer, for example, we will get drunk and be under the influence of alcohol. Other depressants such as barbiturates or tranquilizers and opiates such as morphine and heroin also have similar effects, but sometimes to more extremes. So for example, barbiturates can reduce anxiety but end up impairing memory and judgment. Opiates, again, depress neural activity and lessen pain and anxiety, but they can be extremely addictive. So overall, all of these depressants are, again, calming neural activity and slowing down bodily functions. We then have stimulants. These excite neural activity and speed up bodily functions, sometimes coincide with a drop in appetite. Even more so than depressants, they can be extremely addictive. So even a mild stimulant such as caffeine can be addicting, and we can have withdrawal symptoms such as having a headache or just being in a bad mood when we don't get our cup of coffee every morning. So what are some more serious stimulants? So nicotine, again, is probably, similar to alcohol, one of the most common stimulants that we can think of. This is in cigarettes and other forms of tobacco products. Nicotine boosts alertness, calms anxieties, it reduces pain sensitivity, diminishes appetite, again, for example. But it is extremely deadly and addictive. Hopefully I don't need to enlighten you on the negative consequences of nicotine. And children in early adolescence seem to be most susceptible to taking nicotine or becoming addicted to nicotine because of the kind of social, at least not necessarily recently, but recent history, there has been kind of a positivity associated with nicotine. Those who smoke are cool, and smoking can be socially contagious. If your friends smoke, then you're more likely to smoke, and that's especially the case in adolescence. Other stimulants such as cocaine, methamphetamine, ecstasy, again, are exciting neural activity and speeding up bodily functions. It can sometimes lead to a euphoric rush followed by a very intense crash or depression. It kind of goes for cocaine, methamphetamine, or ecstasy. And each of these different stimulants have different nuances in terms of the positive or negative effects of the drugs. We can also have another subsection of drugs known as hallucinogens. These, rather than increasing or reducing bodily or neural activity, these drugs distort perceptions and evoke specific sensory images. So we can have LSD or acid. This is a synthetic hallucinogen. This can lead to euphoria, detachment, or panic. And it really depends on the current mood or experience of the user. It colors the different types of experiences that people have when they use the drug. So one kind of common trajectory that we see from people who use LSD is initially seeing more abstract shapes, then that leading into more meaningful images, and finally people report feeling kind of separated from their own bodies. And oddly enough, this is similar, this kind of trajectory of feelings and experiences is similar to individuals who have near-death experiences. And one thing we see in common with both of these experiences is oxygen deprivation. So we may see that depriving people of oxygen leads to people sensing and experiencing the world in a very specific pattern. Another hallucinogen is marijuana. This is a natural hallucinogen. It can be smoked or eaten, which oddly enough leads to different experiences of the drug. People who take marijuana, smoke marijuana, for example, tend to have increased sensitivity to sound, colors, taste, smells. It relaxes individuals, but it also disinhibits individuals, similar to alcohol. It lingers in the body for weeks or more. And similar to LSD, the user's experience can differ from one person to the next. And it can depend on their situational state. So people who are maybe more anxious and they smoke marijuana might have more anxious or anxiety-driven hallucinations. There are some obvious negative consequences. It can disrupt memory formation and recall. But there are some actual surprising benefits to marijuana, and some medical facilities are actually use medicinal marijuana to relieve pain or nausea characteristic of some very serious diseases. So there are some benefits of this specific drug. So overall, looking at all these different drugs that are available or not available, depending on the state you live in, the negative after effects of these drugs tend to offset the immediate positive effects that we see. And we tend to see that these negative after effects tend to get more intense, last longer, increase in frequency, the more a person uses that specific drug. So what are the influences on whether or not a person uses drugs? Well, there are some biological influences. So individuals, depending on their genes, on their heredity, may be more susceptible to alcohol abuse, for example. There are psychological influences on drug use. So maybe people who are depressed or feel that life is meaningless or don't feel like they have a direction in life might be especially likely to take drugs. So we see especially individuals who drop out of school, children who drop out of school tend to be more likely to get addicted to drugs. Situational factors such as stress, such as failure in their life, again, like depression. We tend to see girls with eating disorders and girls who have a history of physical or sexual abuse tend to be more likely to fall into drug habits. Social influences are extremely important, whether that be movies or celebrities trying to make smoking look cool, whether that be social forms of drug use such as smoking again, or maybe social drinking or binge drinking. But adolescents are especially susceptible to peer influence. Adolescents maybe more likely to smoke if their friends are doing it, more likely to drink if their friends are doing it. And oftentimes they're more likely to do this even if their friends are not doing it more frequently. So, for example, adolescents tend to overestimate the amount of their friends or classmates who are smoking or drinking or taking drugs. And they use that information as a reason to take drugs, which is rather unfortunate. And interestingly enough, we also do see that drug use can vary from one culture to the next, and in some cultures, certain drug use is more socially acceptable than other cultures. So how do we prevent drug use? Well, there are three main factors that we can focus on when trying to eliminate addictions and trying to prevent people from even trying drugs in the first place. First, it's important to educate youth of the long-term costs of taking these drugs. The more information people have about drugs, especially the long-term costs of drugs, the less likely they are to try them. Secondly, it's extremely important to help individuals find other ways of boosting their self-esteem rather than through taking drugs. So people with depression, rather than taking drugs, have them interact with people that they, enjoy interacting with more often. And lastly, it's also important to modify different social pressures and peer associations that can encourage people to try some of these drugs. Make sure that people realize exactly how many people do take these drugs, that it's oftentimes not very many, and that you don't need to drink alcohol, smoke, take drugs in order to fit in with other people. You can find the individuals that also don't take drugs, also have similar interests as you, rather than trying to fit in with these other people. So that's all I have time for today. Thank you for your time and attention, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.